each screening, there was a talking going on. And I was like watching the audience going, what? The second time it happened, again, third time, talking in this one particular spot. And I'm thinking, what, did we do something wrong?
For years, Jim Caviezel has been trying to warn people about something he believes most of Hollywood does not want exposed. Not just scandal, not just corruption, but a culture of silence. A system where powerful people protect powerful people, while the public only sees the polished version. And when Jim said that out loud, he was not celebrated for it. He was mocked, dismissed, branded as extreme, pushed further and further to the edges of the industry. But now, as public attention turns once again toward the Epstein story and the names orbiting that world, people are starting to revisit Jim's warnings from a completely different angle. Was he really saying something bigger all along? One name that keeps resurfacing in online discussion is Ellen DeGeneres. To be clear, speculation is not proof, and public rumors are not the same as established facts. But Jim's broader message has always pointed toward influence, image management, and silence. And for many people watching this unfold, Ellen's name has become part of that wider conversation. And once a name enters that conversation, people start re-examining everything. That is where this story begins.
She lost everything. She fell apart, disappeared, because people found out that this character that she was portraying in a half an hour on a television show is not really who she was. My buddy Greg, who was one of her writers, was like, she's a piece. He was like, she's a...
Jim Caviezel is not just some random actor with a controversial opinion. This is the man Mel Gibson personally chose to play Jesus in The Passion of the Christ, one of the most successful independent films ever made. At one point, Jim had exactly what most actors spend their entire lives trying to reach: respect, momentum, industry credibility, and a future that looks secure. Then he made a choice that changed the direction of everything. He took on Sound of Freedom, a film connected to the story of Tim Ballard, a former government agent who said he gave up his career to confront child trafficking networks in Latin America. And according to Jim, what he encountered while working on that project did not leave him the same. He has spoken about seeing things that disturbed him deeply. Not internet gossip, not headlines, not secondhand stories, but realities that, in his words, changed the way he looked at the world behind the curtain, and after that his tone shifted. His message became heavier, sharper, more urgent. Because in Jim's view, this was never just about one movie. It was about a system much bigger than any single film, any single celebrity, or any single public scandal.
Against Ellen and her company, and Ellen had 3 of the show's top producers quietly parted ways with the show because of it. But it wasn't just employees. In 2018, an audience member named Dana DiMatteo said she was literally told not to be funnier than Ellen. You see, Dana was a real fan, not just watching from her couch. She flew from Chicago to Los Angeles.
You would think Hollywood would rally behind a film centered on protecting children. But according to Jim and many of the people around the film, that is not what happened. Instead of support, they say there was resistance. Instead of encouragement, there was ridicule. Instead of momentum, there were obstacles. And from Jim's point of view, the message was impossible to miss. Do not touch this subject unless you are prepared to pay a price for it. Do not make the film. Do not promote the film. Do not stand too close to the people making it. And whatever you do, do not keep talking. Then came the label, almost instantly: conspiracy theorist. Jim was criticized, sidelined, and treated like someone who had crossed an invisible line. But he did not back down. He kept speaking. He kept pointing toward what he believed was a deeper structure, one where influence protects itself, where image matters more than truth, and where silence is not accidental. It is strategic. Then public attention around the Epstein story surged back into the mainstream. And suddenly, the same warnings that were once easy to laugh off did not sound so easy to ignore anymore. That is when people started revisiting not just the claims, but the names attached to the pattern.
Got completely soaked, and when it was over, she was told to go backstage in her soaking wet clothes, and then nothing. They just left us there, she said. We waited pretty much the whole show in our soaking wet clothes for someone to bring us dry things to change into.
So who exactly was Jim pointing toward when he talked about power, silence, and protection? One of the names repeatedly pulled into that online conversation was Ellen DeGeneres. Now, this is where caution matters. There are rumors, allegations, leaked claims, viral commentary, endless threads, but none of that should be confused with proven criminal wrongdoing. Still, Ellen remains part of the discussion for one simple reason. To many observers, her public story appears to mirror a larger pattern that people have become far more willing to question. A hugely influential media figure, a carefully maintained public image, then controversy, then distance, then silence. And when Epstein-related scrutiny intensified again, another detail caught people's attention. Reports that Ellen had stepped away from the United States, relocated to England, and moved major property. Was that proof of anything? No. But did it fuel even more speculation? Absolutely. Because in stories like this, timing does not just matter. Timing changes the entire way the public reads the story.
Answers. You see, Ellen's past is full of unexplained passing aways, mysterious.
Now look at the timeline, because this is where public curiosity really started building. In late 2024, before a fresh wave of Epstein-related attention exploded online, Ellen reportedly sold her California property. Soon after, reports connected her to a multi-million-dollar estate in the English countryside. Then came the distance. Fewer public appearances, less visibility, less direct engagement, less explanation. For supporters, it meant nothing. For critics, it looked suspicious. And for everyone else watching, it triggered the same uncomfortable question. Why go so quiet when public scrutiny is only getting louder? Of course, that question did not emerge in a vacuum. Long before these newer speculations, Ellen's image had already taken major damage from stories describing her as harsh, difficult, and deeply unpleasant behind the scenes. Viral posts amplified that perception, and thousands of people piled on with stories of their own, some firsthand, some secondhand, all of it contributing to a dramatic shift in how the public saw her. The woman once marketed as one of the kindest faces on television was now being described in a completely different light. And once the image starts cracking, people do not just question the moment, they start questioning the whole brand.
Hence, not just passionate consuming. Friends of the couple later described them as inseparable. Then Ellen pulled back. Why? Industry pressures, fear of being blackballed, rumors that studios were threatening to pull projects if Ellen stayed publicly linked to Anne. So Ellen made a choice, career over love. And Anne was left.
Ellen was far from nice.
Then the situation escalated. Dozens of former employees came forward with complaints not just about the workplace culture surrounding the Ellen DeGeneres show, but also about the conduct of senior producers tied to the program. Allegations ranged from intimidation and fear to misconduct claims involving key executives. Those allegations were denied by the individuals accused. Warner Media launched an internal investigation, and eventually, major staffing changes followed. Producers were removed, others left. The controversy became far too visible to contain. For many viewers, this was the moment the image truly collapsed. Because once a brand built on kindness becomes associated with fear, humiliation, and dysfunction behind the scenes, the audience starts asking the most damaging question of all. Was any of it real? Ellen eventually addressed the controversy publicly and accepted responsibility for what happened under her watch. But by that point, many former staff members and critics no longer saw the apology as meaningful accountability. To them, it felt like damage control after the mask had already slipped. And once public trust breaks at that level, rebuilding it becomes almost impossible.
Opened it, she said she was looking for a spaceship to take her to heaven. She was hospitalized, diagnosed with a mental breakdown. She eventually recovered and she rebuilt her life. Married a man named James Tupper, had a son, Atlas, kept acting, kept going. For 22 years, Anne Heches survived. But then came August 5th, 2022. Anne was driving her blue Mini Cooper through West Los Angeles, Mar Vista neighborhood, around 11 a.m. What happened next is still being debated to this day.
What happened out here, LA City Fire Department, I got to give it to them right off the...
But for many former employees and longtime viewers, the apology came too late.
And that car catches fire. And when we say into a structure, I mean all the way in, almost coming out the other side. This house out here on Walgrove, right at the cross of Brookhaven, at Preston, you can see...
So what is Jim Caviezel really saying in the bigger picture? His argument is not just about one celebrity, not one scandal, not one headline. It is about a structure, a system of influence, a network of people who validate each other, protect each other, preserve each other's credibility, and keep difficult questions from reaching the surface for as long as possible. Jim has described it using the image of an octopus, a machine with many arms. Remove one arm and the body keeps moving. Replace one host, one executive, one public face, and the larger mechanism survives without missing a beat. That is why, for many people following this story, Ellen is not seen as an isolated case. She is seen as part of a wider framework, a massively influential figure whose public image stayed polished for years, even while criticism quietly built in the background. And when public pressure finally rose, there was no full confrontation, no aggressive push for transparency, no clear attempt to answer every question head-on. There was distance, there was retreat, there was silence. And to some people, that silence means nothing. To others, it means everything. Ellen is also not the only name critics bring up when they talk about silence. Many have pointed out how fast major media personalities are to speak on certain scandals and how cautious they become on others. Some stories dominate the culture for weeks, others barely get mentioned. Some names are safe to criticize, others seem to create hesitation, avoidance, or total quiet. That selective outrage is exactly what gives Jim's message its staying power, because the deeper question is no longer just, did one person know something? The deeper question is, how many people stay silent because silence protects careers? Hollywood has seen this pattern before, with Harvey Weinstein, with R. Kelly, with other powerful figures whose behavior, critics argue, was whispered about long before the public finally reacted. Every time the sequence feels familiar. First disbelief, then denial, then distance, then the sudden claim that nobody could have known. And yet, sooner or later, the public usually finds out that people did know, or at the very least, knew enough to keep their distance and protect themselves. That is Jim Caviezel's central warning. Maybe the system is not broken. Maybe it is operating exactly the way it was designed to operate. Protect the powerful. Discredit the early voices. Manage the narrative. Reward silence. That is why his warnings still resonate. Not because every rumor online is true, not because every allegation has been proven, but because the pattern feels familiar enough to make people stop and look twice. Ellen's situation, whether someone sees it as coincidence, controversy, image collapse, or something more symbolic, has now become part of that broader conversation. The relocation, the timing, the silence, the unraveling of a public persona that once looked untouchable. None of those things prove a crime, but together they create a story people cannot stop examining. And maybe that is the real reason this topic refuses to disappear. Because once the public starts believing that the smiling faces on screen are only the surface layer of something much darker underneath, they stop watching Hollywood the same way. So now the question is not really about Jim anymore. The question is about silence. When influential people go quiet at the exact moment the public wants answers, what does that silence actually mean? Fear? Self-preservation? Loyalty? Complicity? Jim Caviezel kept talking even when it cost him. Others with far bigger platforms said nothing. What do you think that says? Share your thoughts in the comments below.